What's up, Sanisa, Superbad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Golovkin's trainer is dismissive of an immediate third fight with Canelo Alvarez. Jonathan Banks, a former cruiserweight contender and the current head trainer to Golovkin, revealed he is not on board with such a fight should it have to be his first of 2020. No, they've called me about it and I said no. Banks told IFL TV when the discussion turned to reviving the trilogy as the first piece of business once boxing returns at full strength. The plan was for him to get this fight versus Poland's Kamil Szeremeta, Golovkin's mandatory challenger, and get another fight and then fight Canelo. When we went to Canelo and said, we're ready, he said no, I don't want to fight, and then disappeared and went and did whatever he wanted and refused to fight, notes Banks. In a simplistic viewpoint, given Alvarez's level of opposition compared to Golovkin since their rematch, now he's saying, okay, I'm ready. After this, let's do it. G's like, no, I already have something planned. His IBF-mandated bout versus Szeremeta. Golovkin was out of the ring for 9 months following the September 2018 loss to Alvarez. He resurfaced under the DAZN banner, armed with a multi-fight deal which began with a knockout win over undefeated but unheralded Steve Rolls last June. Also his first fight with Banks as head trainer in replacing Abel Sanchez. The prevalent theory was that since the COVID pandemic has affected everybody's schedule, what might happen is that Canelo Alvarez might skip that Saunders fight and go straight into a Golovkin rubber match. That was the look of things for a little while. But as it stands, both Jonathan and Gennady, they're putting their foot down and they're saying, no, we're not on your time, we're not on your schedule, we're on our schedule, and we're going to proceed with the original plan. One might feel so inclined to ask why. If fighting Canelo Alvarez is what you're building towards, if that third fight is an eventuality, a third fight that we all know DAZN wants to deliver.
They do.
If this is true, then why not go through with it?
It's a holdout.
Why not go right into it? Why have this Szeremeta fight, which in many ways seems like a formality?
Skip him.
Well, granted that Szeremeta is the IBF's mandatory challenger to Golovkin's belt. Lest we forget, this guy's still a world champion. I think that most people, they don't realize that Gennady, he's got a belt. Canelo Alvarez, he still holds the WBA title in the middleweight division, so the fight between them would be a unification match. But if the match is an eventuality, then why are Gennady and Jonathan choosing to forego it and proceed with the plan? There's a few reasons, at least a few reasons I can think of. You know, one, they don't want Canelo Alvarez and his people wagging their fucking finger in their face and telling them what's what. You know,
Is that to consider?
there is the principle of the thing. That they're not just going to go with it based on what Canelo wants or what Canelo says. That they'll go when they're good and ready to go. And right now, perhaps they don't feel ready to go. We'll get into why that is soon enough. But they're not just going to do it because Canelo wants them to do it or because Canelo is making alterations to the plan.
Fuck your alteration.
Fuck your plan. Just because you feel like skipping past Billy or Callum or whoever the fuck it was you were going to fight doesn't mean I'm going to do the same thing. I'm on my own time, my own schedule, and I'm proceeding with it regardless of what you want. There's that to consider. The principle of the thing.
General principle.
You know, Gennady Golovkin, for the longest time now, it seems like Canelo Alvarez has been the focal point of his career. You know, I understood chasing the guy down for the first fight. But after things worked out the way that they did, that Golovkin and many people were in opposition of the original decision from the first fight, that it was scored a draw, where a lot of people thought Golovkin did more than enough to have won the fight. You see what happened with the clenbuterol situation. You see that the powers that be, the alphabets, those organizations, they were actually defending Canelo at a time when they're supposed to be investigating him. If you're Gennady Golovkin and you're looking at this, you know, it's painfully clear that you're on an uneven playing field, that this guy, he's walking into these situations with a lot of advantages, yet you still chose to fight him for a second time when when you could have decided to fight Billy Joe Saunders for what was then the undisputed middleweight championship. You could have did that. And that Canelo Alvarez fight, that wasn't going to go nowhere. You understand? That fight was still going to be there. If anything, there would have been that much more pressure on Canelo to finish that unfinished business. And people would have forgave Gennady Golovkin for choosing to go through with a Saunders fight instead of a Canelo Alvarez rematch. The rematch wasn't going to go nowhere. But as it stands, Gennady Golovkin basically sacrificed his IBF title.
He did.
By fighting Vanez Martirosyan, which the IBF did not support, as Vanez Martirosyan was inactive for 2 years and did absolutely nothing in the middleweight division. Gennady Golovkin basically sacrificed his world title, fighting that guy,
preserve himself,
as a bit of a keep busy preservation match.
I don't understand.
Ask yourself a question. If the IBF already vocalized discontent with the idea that Golovkin would be fighting Vanez Martirosyan at 160 pounds, if they already expressed discontent and they actually went as far as warning Gennady Golovkin not to have that fight because they won't sanction it,
there's consequences.
Why did Gennady decide to go through with it anyway? What was he hoping to accomplish? Vanez was a guy who was inactive for 2 years, and for the most part, most of what he did, if he did anything, was in the junior middleweight division, not the middleweight division. The guy was coming off a loss. Why are you so focused on fighting that guy if the IBF has actually warned you not to fight that guy?
Why do it?
He was trying to preserve himself. That's what he was doing. He was trying to keep busy, keep the tools sharp, but not walk into so hairy a situation that he might walk into a Canelo Alvarez rematch injured or physically depleted, having come off of a hard fight. I mean, that's why he so decided to fight that guy who had been inactive for 2 years, and really he's a junior middleweight. That's why he chose that guy as opposed to someone else. He struck a deal with the IBF.
To keep his belt.
Deal was, okay, we'll let you fight Vanez, and we won't strip you of your IBF title so long as you promise to satisfy your mandatory challenger, Sergey Didivianchenko. Golovkin, as we all know, he didn't honor the deal.
He waffled.
But he would have never had to make a deal to begin with had he not chosen to fight Vanez. You don't fight Vanez, you don't gotta reach any kind of deal. But because he decided to go through with that fight, it costed him. It costed him his IBF title, which he was more than willing to sacrifice so that he could preserve himself for a Canelo Alvarez rematch. It was my contention at that time that what Gennady Golovkin should have done was fought Sergey Didivianchenko instead of Vanez. That way he can approach the Canelo Alvarez rematch without any sanctioning bodies breathing down his neck. If he would have fought Sergey instead of Vanez, he would have never had to reach a deal in the first place. You would have satisfied your obligations as a champion. But he chose not to do this. Chose to fight Vanez in what was an unsanctioned fight instead. And the rhyme and the reason for it is obvious. Vanez won't put up the resistance that a Sergey Didivianchenko would have put up. And you don't want to be coming off of a hard fight, even a fight where you win. You don't want to be coming off of a very physically taxing fight ahead of a Canelo Alvarez rematch. Thus, Golovkin's priority was preserving himself for that second Canelo Alvarez fight. All of Gennady Golovkin's time, attention, his efforts were centered around Canelo Alvarez, and it seems that he's finally learned his lesson. I mean, what's the saying? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But fool me 3 times, and I'm the one that's asking for it. So, general principles, the principle of the thing, might have something to do with why Gennady Golovkin and Jonathan Banks are putting their foot down and they're saying no. Just because Canelo wants this to be the next fight doesn't mean we're on board with this. We had a plan, and we're sticking to it.
General principles
Might have something to do with why they're choosing to forego an immediate third fight. Principle, and lest we forget, preservation. That Gennady Golovkin, whether you like it or not, is not the same guy that he used to be. That was painfully evident in his last fight, the Sergey Didivianchenko fight. Now, some credit has to be given to Sergey for what we saw. Ahead of that fight, I told you guys, he's a solid guy, and I'm expecting Golovkin to have a hard fight with Sergey.
He did.
Some credit has to be given to Sergey for the fight having looked the way that it looked. But better still, Golovkin's age. It's starting to show up.
Like it or not.
And the relevance of that to this conversation is that Gennady wants to preserve himself long enough that he can get the most out of this DAZN deal as he possibly can. And if he were to go into an immediate third fight with Canelo Alvarez, might actually stifle his plans to get the most out of this deal. Can he actually see this multi-fight DAZN deal through intact, in one piece, if Canelo is his next opponent? You know, Abel Sanchez, he fears Golovkin will take major damage with Canelo. He's quoted as saying, "This one maybe will hurt. Not because I'm not with him, but this time it could hurt because he gets hurt." The trilogy not only is the most significant, it's the most dangerous, because you're talking about a guy who is at his peak now and believes he can do the same thing to Gennady that he did to Kovalev, Sanchez explained to the Athletics Pug and Cop podcast. Canelo baited, and waited for the right moment, and it was destructive. I would hate to see Gennady go into that fight, or I would rather not see the fight than to see Gennady succumb to something like that. Not being prepared physically and mentally. That being said, if Gennady Golovkin were to go right into a third fight with Canelo Alvarez as his very next match, who says that this guy will be in the right physical condition to see out what could be the last two fights of this deal? Canelo Alvarez could very well stop Gennady Golovkin dead in his tracks in that third fight, at which point the only logical thing for Gennady to do moving forward would be to retire. So we've talked about principle, we've talked about preservation, but what about preparation? Golovkin's last fight, that took place in October of last year, and as it stands, he hasn't had a fight yet this year, in 2020. It's conceivable that the next time Gennady enters the ring could have been a year's time since his last fight. So you're talking about an older guy, as far as boxers go. You're talking about an older guy, pushing 40, he's getting close, who perhaps will not have had a fight in a year's time, walking in there against the likes of a Canelo Alvarez, a young guy who's in peak physical condition. What do you think happens in that situation? I know a lot of you out there, bleeding hearts, want to play Gennady Golovkin the violin. You understand why he's done things the way he's done things, but better still, whether you like it or not, there's a good chance that he goes into that third Canelo Alvarez fight and he doesn't finish the fight on his feet. It's entirely possible. Gennady Golovkin is not the guy now that he was then. He's not the same guy that he used to be. And in that situation, you need to buy yourself as much time to prepare as you possibly can. We know that Gennady is still very much in an experimental phase with what is a brand new trainer, Jonathan Banks. And I don't think that these two guys have ironed out all the kinks just yet. I don't think that Jonathan has molded Gennady into the fighter that he wants him to be after a meager 2 fights. Gennady Golovkin, for the longest time, trained under the tutelage of Abel Sanchez. Big Bear Lake. And when you're a guy Gennady Golovkin's age, you really do get set in your ways, accustomed to doing things in a certain form, in a certain fashion. And this experimental stage that Golovkin's in, this experimental phase with a brand new trainer,
needs time.
It's going to require a little bit more time if this is intended to make the relationship more cohesive and ultimately round Gennady Golovkin out as a fighter, because he is no longer the same destructive force that he used to be. He has to go about fighting a fight and winning a fight differently now that he's getting older. No doubts this is what Jonathan hopes to accomplish, and it's for this reason that right now, going right into a third Canelo Alvarez fight under these circumstances, it's a bad fucking idea. Oh, it's a good idea for Canelo, it's a good idea for Golden Boy, it might even be a great idea for DAZN. That they can deliver you the fight where Gennady Golovkin finally got stopped. Yeah, that might very well drive up subscriptions. You know, the possibility of that happening. It might. I mean, it's certainly a cheaper alternative than buying a pay-per-view. It's certainly a cheaper alternative than what the first 2 fights costed the average boxing fan. That selling point, it might make sense for DAZN, might make sense for Canelo, but for Gennady, it wouldn't make much sense. Honestly, it makes no sense. That if you still got 2 other fights you can have, you might as well have them so that you can make your money, and then you cap things off with a Canelo Alvarez rubber match. The question is, if Gennady Golovkin ends up fighting Kamil Chimichanga.
It's Zeremata.
Sorry, Kamil Zeremata. If he ends up fighting that guy, and he has intentions of having yet another fight ahead of a Canelo Alvarez rubber match, might feel so inclined to ask, well, who's he going to fight? He'd presumably try to preserve himself, take it easy, the fight right before a Canelo Alvarez rubber match, the same way he did in the second fight with Canelo. He chose to take it easy by fighting Vanez, and one would interpret Zeremata, in spite of him being his mandatory challenger, as a lighter touch. So what, you're going to have two lighter touches? Hey, listen, you can feel about it however the fuck you want to feel about it. If you want to bash him for it, you can. If you want to defend him for it, you can. It's ultimately besides the point, as I've no doubts that DAZN still plans on expanding their area of operations to 200 plus countries, because that's what the reports were, before this COVID thing started. They planned on expanding their area of operations to 200 different territories, 200 different countries. And they want to make a splash. They're going to want to make a splash as to drive up subscriptions in each one of these regions. And this might leave them feeling so inclined to put pressure on Gennady Golovkin to have that third Canelo Alvarez fight sooner than later, as to help drive up subscriptions whilst they expand to these varying territories. But at the end of the day, Golovkin did sign a multi-fight agreement, and unless he's somehow in violation of that agreement, they can't force him into that situation, which could mean that they might have to compensate him financially in order to make that Canelo Alvarez rubber match happen sooner than later. Because if Golovkin and Jonathan, if they stick to the original plan, you're looking at a Canelo Alvarez rubber match that perhaps happens well over a year from now. I mean, they're talking about having 2 more fights before they fight Canelo. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a rubber match, at least based on these plans, that could happen sometime in mid to late 2021. As it stands, we don't actually know when boxing is going to resume, and in reference to that, when is the next time Gennady Golovkin will step into the ring? All we know is that Jonathan Banks is shooting down the idea that Gennady's very next fight is going to be against Canelo Alvarez, that it is going to be against Kamil Zeremata, and that kind of a fight could take place late in 2020, provided that boxing is back in full swing in late 2020. What this communicates to me is that Gennady Golovkin's career is nearing the end of the road, that he means to get the most out of this DAZN deal as he possibly can, and he's not playing by Canelo's rules. This time, he's playing by his own. And you can make of that what you will.